Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. An original adaptation written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 15. A Visitation. Gawain lay as still as he possibly could. A moment ago he'd been in a deep sleep and looking forward to more, but now Lady Bertilac had snuck into his rooms and he did not know what to do. "This," said the voice in his head, "is quite the pickle." It was still early and the castle was mostly silent, so any noise he made might risk bringing people running. Whatever her reason for being there, Gawain was fairly convinced being found with the lady of the castle in your bedroom while her husband was out hunting was not a good look. Keeping his eyes closed, he resolved to pretend to still be asleep. Surely, if he was in a deep sleep, she would lose interest and leave him be. But his theatrics did not have the desired effect. Instead, he heard her moving closer to his bed. "Oh, this is quite the large pickle," said the voice in his head. A soft hand brushed a hair from his forehead, and it took all the self-restraint Gawain had not to yelp in shock. Deciding the plan to feign sleep was not working, he yawned expansively and rolled over, letting his eyelids flutter open. It was then that he saw her, really saw her. Gawain had always found Lady Bertilac beautiful, but somehow it seemed all her previous appearances had just been pretending. Perhaps it was the half-light of the early morning playing its part, but now she was breathtaking. Her hair hung loose about her face, copper locks falling artfully across her shoulders. She wore no jewellery, no adornments, just a flowing, pale robe, trimmed with white fur at the shoulders, and cinched at the waist with a broad green sash. She looked perfect. Gawain was so taken by her beauty that for a moment he could not speak. Eventually his brain realised something was required to fill the silence, and he opened his mouth. "My lady," he breathed, thanking God it hadn't come out in the high squeak he'd been half expecting. "How may I serve you and your husband?" He tried to put subtle emphasis on the word husband, in case there was any chance she had failed to notice quite how inappropriate this visitation was, and the cost to them both if she was seen. The warning bore no weight, though, and it seemed she was all too aware of the impropriety but did not care. She gave no answer, but simply removed her robe to reveal the shift beneath it, and her intentions were all too clear. As if on cue, a ray of early morning sunlight speared through the gap in the curtain and lit Lady Bertilac as she stood, and Gawain saw her fully, and through her thin shift Gawain saw her fully. "This," interjected his inner voice, "is the mother of all pickles." "My husband is away hunting," said Lady Bertilac, finally breaking her silence, "and she'll be gone for hours. The rest of the castle is asleep." She made no move, just stood there making sure Gawain had seen all she wished him to see. "I can think of quite a few services I'm sure that you could render." Gawain's head span. He was half convinced this must be a dream, but frankly no dream of his could ever produce a vision so perfect. He was no stranger to the ways of the world, and in the past this would have been an invitation he would have accepted without thinking twice. Lady Bertilac was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and whenever they were together there was this crackling spark. And in that moment he wanted nothing more than to indulge all the instincts he had. But in the last year he'd gone to great lengths teaching himself to think twice, to consider the consequences of his actions. That old question of Arthur's came back to him, are you making the lives of people around you better? And he knew that this would not. As soon as the initial thrill was over, the only outcome of this would be pain and heartbreak. There was no scenario he could find where his taking the offered path would make anyone's life better. He opened his mouth to politely refuse when the voice in his head practically screamed at him, "Stop!" He paused. "Tread softly," the voice advised, and he took a second to consider the situation. In doing so, he realized how delicate it really was. To reject the Lady Bertilac outright was, potentially, to make an enemy of her. She had risked a lot in coming to him like this, and a person who's willing to risk all that may also be willing to make other bold moves if their risk did not pay off as they planned. A part of Gawain's mind told him that surely he can trust the Lady Bertilac, but in her actions here, She had proved she was not the person he thought she was, and he was suddenly aware he did not really know her that well at all. His mind flashed back to a story Bishop Badwin had told him from the Bible, about Joseph, son of Jacob, who found himself in a very similar situation with Potiphar's wife. The story had worked out all right for Joseph, but only after spending several years in prison. Gawain did not have several years to spare. He needed to be at the Green Chapel within a week. With horrible understanding, Gawain realized that at that moment, Lady Bertilac held his reputation and potentially his life in her hands. And they were no longer hands he felt he could trust. He would have to tread softly indeed. "My lady," he said, sitting up in his bed, and only then realizing that he was completely naked under his covers. "Of course," said the voice in his head, "because what was needed here was an opportunity to make this moment even more awkward." Pressing on, he tried again. "My lady, I fear you have me at something of a disadvantage. I am a guest here in your home, and there is much that I may not understand." Despite his nakedness, he clothed himself in formality, wearing it like armour against an onslaught. "You and your husband seem a pair well matched and very much in love." "Well matched we might be," interrupted Lady Bertilac. "He is fine and kind and generous, but love—" She hesitated for a moment, and there was a profound sadness in her eyes. Then it was replaced by something altogether more animal, and she strode towards him. "I fear I do not know as much of love as I might like." She reached out to run her hand along his leg, and Gawain scrambled to the other side of the bed, wrapping the sheets around him like a robe. "I know of love," he blurted out, desperate to halt her advance before it got any more alarming. She paused. "You?" she asked. "You have known love, young as you are?" There was a note of jealousy in her tone, and again that flash of sadness crossed her eyes. "In truth, my lady," said Gawain, still clinging to that courtly formality like a shield, "it is not my tale of love, but it is a tale of love as a lesson learned, in which I played my part." "Oh, spare me love stories, Gawain," scoffed Lady Bertilac. "I am fit to burst on stories. I would know real love, the love that changes a soul." She spoke with a passion that boiled, until the pressure of it steamed over Gawain and left him scalded. "If I cannot know love," she went on, the passion changing to a soft, slow simmer, "then I shall know pleasure. And I do not care for a well-spun story where you are the architect of true love for another, and thus qualified to advise me on matters of my own heart. I have better uses for you." "But, lady," replied Gawain, "in this I was no architect of love, but the near destroyer of it." She paused, and Gawain felt oddly breathless and sat frozen still like a hunted animal when the hunter is nearby. "You?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "The destroyer of love? What sort of man takes love from other people? Why would you do such a thing?" "I did not know it, my lady," said Gawain, fortifying his words with formality. "But still the actions were mine, and I bear the blame of it." He tried to say just enough to make her want to know more, without giving away the tale all told. "Very well," said the lady, her tone the soft purring of a cat with a mouse between its paws. "You may tell me your tale." Gawain breathed a sigh of relief. The panic within him calmed, and he began. "I came into this story some years back, my lady. But to know it fully, you must know a little of its history. In the forest of Brecilien, which all men know to be magic, there is a stone of storms. Some say it's a fountain, but that's only because the stone is activated by water. When water is poured on the stone, a storm can be summoned and sent anywhere to attack any land. As I'm sure you can imagine, such a powerful weapon should not be left unguarded. And indeed, this stone had a guardian, the Red Knight. Whoever takes the duty of guarding the stone also takes the mantle of the Red Knight. And as our story commences, that mantle was borne by a man named Esclados. Esclados was a brave and noble knight. He did his duty well, served God, and loved his wife, the Lady Lodine." "Please," interrupted Lady Bertilac, "if this is a love you spoke of, then it seems ordinary to me at best." "That has not come yet, my lady, but it shall," Gawain reassured her. "As I was saying, Sir Esclados was a good knight, but he had an enemy he did not know of. Sir Owain, my brother knight of the Round Table, sought Esclados to challenge him in single combat because of the defeat Esclados had dealt his younger cousin. So Owain called out Esclados and the two had a mighty battle, but in the end Owain was victorious. As Esclados lay dying, his wife, Lodine, ran out to hold her husband one final time, and instantly Owain loved her. Love at first sight, sneered Lady Bertilac. This truly is a child's tale. Some lovers like that, replied Gawain, and Lady Bertilac looked at him so piercingly that Gawain was forced to look away. Or so I am told. He went on. So, Owain fell immediately in love with Lodine, and he began to woo her. But he knew this would be no easy courtship. Owain was a good and loyal man and would be a fine match, but he was also the man who had just slain her husband. So Owain determined to woo not only her, but her friends, her servants, her family, everyone who he could he won over, knowing that the more of them he knew, the more people would advise Lodine towards him. Eventually his plan succeeded. Initially, I suspect she married him just for his strength and the protection he provided, but over time, a true love began to blossom in her heart. The two of them lived and loved well. Owain took on the mantle of the Red Knight, guarding the stone, and so they should have lived long and happy. And this is where you come in? Asked Lady Bertilac. This is where I come in, Gawain confirmed. Understand, if you can, that this was some years back, where I was a foolish youth with a passion to prove myself. I chased fame and glory, but could never seem to have enough, and always felt like others were living the life I lusted after. Gawain paused, remembering those times and feeling glad they were behind him now. As my missions increased, my renown grew, and Owain became enamoured with the idea of errantry again. He felt a hunger for the hunt, to be out beside his brothers doing battle. He looked at all he had, the love of Lodine, the mantle of the Red Knight, the happy hearth and home, and he decided it was not enough for him. Lodine was, as you can imagine, heartbroken, but she hoped it was nothing more than a turning season for Owain, and if she let him go, he would realise what he had left and return to her. She was both right and wrong. She gave him her blessing, and with it she gave him a ring, and on that ring was inscribed the word March, for that was when Owain was to return to her, and he agreed. So Owain rode off with me. Months passed, and we charged headlong over the land of Britain and abroad, doing mighty feats and daring deeds. We won fame and glory, and our names were sung, but March came, and Owain was due to go home to Lodine. Oh, Owain, I told him, don't go home yet. You're doing so well, and the feel of a sword in your hand cannot be bested, as we both know. Eventually, I wore him down, and he stayed with me. First for one more mission, then another and another. April came and went, May passed us by. Finally, high summer arrived, and at the time of the midsummer festivities, a young woman found us. Her name was Lunette. She was Lodine's most trusted friend. She stripped Owain of the ring Lodine had given him, and told him that he was not worthy to return, and was no longer welcome anywhere in the magical forest of Brecilien. Then she was gone, and my lady, I swear to you, I have never seen a man so lost and bereft. Immediately the strength of life fled from him, and he fell to the floor. For 2 days he neither ate nor drank, and on the 3rd day he stole away into the woods by the dead of night. I tried to find him, but Owain was always a wily forester, and I could not track him, search though I might. Gawain paused his story here, struck with a pang of guilt that had he not been a man so distracted with his own cares, he may have made the effort to look harder. For years he lived as a wild man of the woods, Gawain went on, and I'm told he forgot the power of speech, that he learned to communicate with animals, that he saved a lion's life and fought a dragon. Here Gawain paused again, suddenly realising he now understood what that feat truly meant. Whether these rumours are true I cannot say, and Owain has never confirmed or denied any of it. What I do know is that one day he was shocked back into his senses when he came across a hideous sight. A young woman tied to a stake by a furious roiling mass of a mob. He could see that they were piling tinder and dry wood under her to make a fire, and he knew what would happen next. So Owain, still naked and wild, charged headlong into the crowd and, despite the fact that he had no weapon, laid about him to left and right. Eventually he fought off the crowds and freed the young lady, only to find that it was his wife's best friend, Lunette. In thanks, she agreed to help Gawain back into the good graces of Lady Lodine, and over the course of a whole year, he set about courting her all over again. He tirelessly demonstrated his love in big acts and small actions. Time and again, Owain poured out his heart and the feelings of love to Lodine, until eventually she saw the true level of the change in the man she had once loved, and opened her heart to him again. I can tell you they now live in happiness and peace in Bressilienne, where Owain is, once again, the Red Knight. There is a lion that lives with them too, so I suppose that part of the legend must be true. I see him from time to time, and he is truly the happiest man I know. I no longer try and keep him from his lady. I have learned that lesson well. Gawain's story came to a close, and Lady Bertilac stared at him. That truly was a tale of love that changes the soul of a man, she said. There was an icy quiet to her now, though thin and brittle. Gawain could not tell if it came from hearing of a love that she would never know, or from his own role in the story, or some other cause. A long silence stretched, and eventually the sounds of the castle, now stirring to life, began filtering into the room. Lady Bertilac heard it too. I should go, she said, gathering her discarded robe and turning to leave. But I say that you are no true knight. Gawain was so stung by the accusation that he was lost for words. Was this because of his role in Owain's downfall? Before he could ask, Lady Bertilac went on, and once again there was that prowling, predatory look in her eyes. No true knight would have failed to give a lady to whom he has pledged service a kiss by way of parting. Gawain froze. She was quite right that a formal kiss was proper in that moment, but he was not sure he could trust himself, and there was a sly glint in Lady Bertilac's eye that said he could not trust her either. He was caught, a hare in a snare, and from the looks of her, Lady Bertilac knew it. Still, it was part of the formality he had clothed himself in as protection from her advances, and so, steeling his every nerve, he kissed her chastely on the lips. Those lips, though, soft and sweet and sensuous, and all he wanted to do was let go of his restraint and throw himself into that kiss, dive into it headfirst and follow the course of the stream. But would it make anyone's lives better? Only briefly. And then there would be only pain and sadness. Tread softly, said the voice in his head again, and Gawain broke the kiss. As he did, he saw a flash of emotion in Lady Bertilac's eye, but he could not tell what it was. Without a word, she turned and left. Thank you for listening. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a Settle Stories commission. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story consultant was Miriam Sarin. Music was Tectonic by Saedra, downloaded via Uppbeat. It was a Parable Arts production.